Florence, fall 2015, the Halcyon Haze. The attic studio on Longarno Acciaiuoli wasn't just old, it was ancient, probably seen more plagues and popes than Marco Rossi had seen hot dinners. But damn, it had soul. And right now, that soul was humming to the rhythm of Marco's vintage singer, its needle a silver hummingbird darting through a cloud of ivory silk. Marco, all of 28, with a mop of dark curls that looked like he'd wrestled a thundercloud and lost, hunched over the fabric. His hands, usually gesticulating wildly when he talked about art or pasta, were now surging steady, coaxing life into the inert material. The gown taking shape under the moody glow of an Edison bulb wasn't just a dress. It was a goddamn symphony in silk, a whispered conversation between Renaissance austerity and the kind of raw, modern edge that could make a Milanese fashion critic weep. The door, predictably, groaned open. Gianni Lombardi, 50-something, built like a retired linebacker, squeezed into an impeccably tailored Brioni suit, navigated the organized chaos. He placed a cappuccino, its foam a perfect, quivering dome, on the one clear corner of Marco's cutting table. The aroma of dark roast and something floral jasmine from a chipped vase near the window cut through the faint, metallic scent of overworked machinery. Jesus, kid, Gianni rumbled, his voice still carrying the gravel of too many cigarettes, smoked in back alleys cutting deals. How do you do it? It's silk, for Christ's sake. You make it breathe. Marco looked up, a smudge of charcoal on his cheekbone, his eyes the color of good espresso lighting up with a grin that could charm the pants off a cardinal. Easy, Gianni. I listen. These threads, they're not quiet. They're screaming stories of Tuscan moonlit nights, of weavers who poured their goddamn souls into every inch. You just gotta tune in. Gianni snorted, a sound that was half affection, half exasperation. Right, and I'm the Pope's tailor. Keep dreaming, kid, but keep making this. He gestured at the gown. This is our ticket out of the minor leagues. 2 years later, the Gilded Cage. Bella Rinascita. The name dripped from the lips of Italy's elite like aged balsamic. Marco Rossi was no longer just a kid in an attic. He was the Marco Rossi. His shows were legend, his waiting list a who's who of European aristocracy and new money magnates. But the spotlight cast long, ugly shadows. The stomach pains started as a dull ache, a nagging reminder of skipped meals and coffee-fueled all-nighters. Now, they were a vice, clamping down with vicious, unpredictable cruelty. He'd be sketching, lost in the flow, and then bam, doubled over, gasping, the world shrinking to a pinprick of agony. Then there was Signora Lucia, head of his bustling new atelier, a woman whose face seemed permanently set in an expression of disapproval, like she just smelled something foul. She was old school, a tyrant of tradition. Every time Marco suggested a new weave, an unconventional blend, her steel ruler would slap the cutting table with the crack of a gunshot. Pazzo, crazy, she'd bark, her voice raspy from decades of shouting over clattering machines. You want to reinvent the wheel? Stick to what works, boy, before you bankrupt us all with your experiments. But Marco saw things. He'd see her, late at night, when she thought no one was looking, carefully smoothing out a discarded swatch of his latest crazy idea, a silk blended with recycled ocean plastic, another with nettle fibers. She'd fold it, her gnarled fingers surprisingly gentle, and tuck it into a battered tin box she kept locked in her bottom drawer, a secret stash of his madness, or maybe his genius. He wasn't sure she knew the difference. Milan, March 2020, the Ides of March. The pandemic was just a whisper then, a distant rumble. The real earthquake hit Marco on a miserable, sleet-lashed Milan morning. He was in their sterile glass and steel showroom, a world away from the dusty charm of his Florentine attic. His laptop screen was a battlefield of bad news. Emails, one after another, like a digital firing squad. Hotel, Daniele, Venice. Regret to inform you, cancellation of the bridal collection, quality concerns. La Rinascita, Milan. Unforeseen issues with the recent fabric shipment, halting all orders. Boutique Bellissima, Rome. Client complaints regarding material integrity. Quality concerns? Marco whispered, his blood turning to ice water. His quality was impeccable. It was his religion. Gianni stumbled in, looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. His usually immaculate suit was rumpled, his face gray. In his hand, he clutched a roll of packing tape. Not the high-grade stuff they used, but cheap, flimsy plastic. Adhering to it were coarse, dull threads. Not their lustrous, ethically sourced Como silk. This was garbage. Chinese knockoff crap. We've been hit, Marco. Gianni's voice was a broken thing. Sabotage. Someone swapped our bolts, replaced our lifeblood with this trash. He threw the tape onto the polished mahogany table. It landed with a pathetic, sticky sound. And I know who. There's only one bastard, ruthless enough, connected enough. He spat the name out like poison. De Luca. Antonio De Luca. The 60-year-old patriarch of Luxuria Holdings, a fashion conglomerate built on hostile takeovers and whispered scandals. De Luca, with his perfectly sculpted silver hair, his oil-slicked charm, and eyes like a shark's, dead, cold, and always hungry. He'd tried to buy out Bella Rinascita a year ago. Marco had told him, politely but firmly, to go screw himself. De Luca hadn't taken it well. That night, Marco found himself driving his beat-up Fiat 500, a relic from his leaner days, through the rain-slicked Milanese streets. He parked across from Luxuria's monolithic headquarters, a black glass tombstone scraping the polluted sky. Through the tinted rain-streaked windows of De Luca's penthouse office, he could see him. Antonio De Luca, raising a crystal flute of what was probably obscenely expensive champagne, surrounded by his sycophantic cronies. Their laughter, faint and distorted, still managed to pierce the glass, the rain, the thrumming of Marco's own enraged pulse. It was the laughter of a king who just crushed a bothersome gnat. Marco's hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white. He wanted to storm in there, to feel the crunch of De Luca's perfectly capped teeth under his fist. A soft tap on his window made him jump. A woman stood in the downpour, a figure sketched in shades of gray and black. Her trench coat, the color of a stormy sky, was peppered with raindrops. Her face, pale and angular, was framed by dark, cropped hair. Her eyes, though, were what held him. They were ancient, like she'd seen the rise and fall of empires, and they burned with a cold, intelligent fire. "He's not worth a prison sentence, Marco Rossi," she said, her voice surprisingly soft, yet carrying an edge of tempered steel. It was Sofia Bianchi, a freelance investigative journalist known for digging up dirt the Carabinieri couldn't find. She'd done a small, flattering piece on Bella Rinascita a year ago. "You can't beat him with your fists. He's too insulated, too powerful." She gave a mirthless smile. "But I know his pressure points. I know how to make that bastard choke on his own ambition. The monastery of Santa Maria Novella, Italian Alps, a Hail Mary." The wind on the cliff face was a rabid dog, snapping and tearing at Marco. He clung to the frozen rock, his expensive leather gloves offering little purchase, his lungs burning with the thin, icy air. Below, the drop was terrifying, a plunge into oblivion. Sofia Bianchi, a few feet ahead, looking as comfortable as if she were strolling through the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II, glanced back. A smirk played on her lips. "Fall, Rossi, and you'll make the world's most tragically beautiful artisanal carpet." "Hilarious, Bianchi?" he gritted out, his voice snatched away by the gale. "Just remind me why we're risking our necks to visit a bunch of nuns in the middle of goddamn nowhere?" "Because, genius," she called back, her voice cutting through the wind's howl. "These aren't just any nuns. One of them, Sister Clara, is a goddamn alchemist. They say she can spin gold from straw. Or, more accurately, silk from plastic shit nobody wants." Sister Clara was a wisp of a woman, ancient and bird-like, her face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by time and devotion. In the flickering candlelight of the monastery's scriptorium, they were off-grid, of course. She held up a skein of thread. It shimmered, impossibly soft, impossibly luminous. "God does not create waste, my children," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves skittering across stone. "Only man, in his arrogance, discards what can be reborn." Her gnarled fingers, surprisingly strong, worked a small hand-cranked device, feeding in shredded plastic water bottles at one end, drawing out gossamer filaments from the other. It was slow, painstaking, miraculous. The first night in the drafty, stone-cold guest cell, Marco couldn't sleep. The altitude, the gnawing fear of what lay ahead, De Luca's smug face. He wandered the icy corridors, drawn by a faint light. He found Sofia in the monastery's tiny, unadorned chapel. She was kneeling before a simple wooden crucifix, her shoulders shaking. In her tightly clenched fist, he saw the corner of a faded photograph. A woman, gaunt, with Sofia's eyes, standing in what looked like a textile factory, the air thick with dust or smoke. "I'll make him pay, Mama," Sofia choked out, the sound raw, stripped of all her usual cynicism. "For everything. I swear it." Marco backed away, a cold dread seeping into his bones. This wasn't just about business for Sofia. This was blood. Capri, De Luca's villa, into the lion's den. The party at Villa Arachne, De Luca's palatial Capri hideout, was an obscene display of wealth. Mountains of lobster, rivers of champagne, an orchestra playing Vivaldi with a kind of desperate gaiety. Marco, looking impossibly suave in a borrowed tuxedo that Sofia had somehow procured, felt like a fraud. Sofia, a siren in a blood-red vintage Dior, moved through the glittering throng like a panther, her eyes scanning, cataloging. Their plan was simple, audacious. Leak damning evidence of De Luca's illegal waste dumping practices, the source of his cheap materials and the ruin of countless small businesses, to a rival media outlet during the party, creating maximum chaos and public humiliation. It went sideways, fast. 1 minute, Marco was nursing a Negroni, trying to look like he belonged. The next, De Luca, his face a mask of cold fury, was standing before them, a thick dossier slapped down on a nearby marble table. "You think this kindergarten crap can touch me?" De Luca's voice was deceptively soft, but with an undercurrent of pure menace. He tapped the dossier. "My offshore accounts? My shell corporations?" Quaint. Marco's blood ran cold. It was their evidence. Every painstakingly gathered piece of it. How? "Bring her in." De Luca purred to two mountains of muscle who materialized from the shadows. They dragged Sofia into the grand salon. Her lip was split, a trickle of blood staining her chin, but her eyes, fixed on De Luca, blazed with pure, unadulterated hatred. De Luca pulled a sleek Beretta pistol from inside his dinner jacket. He pressed it to Sofia's temple. The festive music screeched to a halt. The chatter died. You could hear the clink of ice in a forgotten glass. A charming little game, Miss Bianchi. Or should I say, Rizzo. De Luca's smile was reptilian. "Sign this." He slid a document across the table towards Marco, a full confession, implicating Marco in a non-existent network in an elaborate scheme to defame Luxuria, absolving De Luca of everything. "Sign it, Rossi, or your brave little crusader here ends up like a beached mermaid, pretty, tragic, and very, very dead." Marco's hand trembled as he reached for the pen. His career, his reputation, his life, all of it was on the line. But Suddenly, Sofia laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You still don't get it, do you, you arrogant prick?" she spat, blood flecking her words. "Do you know why I picked him?" She nodded towards Marco, whose face was a mask of bewildered horror. "Why I decided this pretty boy designer was the key to your destruction." De Luca frowned, the gun unwavering. "Enlighten me before I lose my patience." "Because of his grandmother," Sofia cried, her voice ringing through the stunned silence. "Rosa Mancini. Does that name ring a bell, you son of a bitch? She was the only one in that miserable sweatshop you owned in Prado who dared to speak up when your faulty wiring, your ignored safety codes, burned the place down. The only one who tried to tell the world how my mother, Maria Rizzo, died screaming in that fire you covered up." The room was utterly, deathly still. De Luca's face, for the first time Marco had ever seen, lost its composure. It went from crimson rage to a ghastly, mottled white. The Beretta wavered. "Maria Rizzo," he whispered, the name a strange foreign sound on his tongue. He stared at Sofia, truly seeing her, perhaps for the first time. The set of her jaw, the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the ghost of another woman's face superimposed on hers. You're her daughter? Maria's my daughter?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sofia stared back, her own shock warring with decades of hate. The gun clattered from De Luca's nerveless fingers onto the marble floor. Florence, Santa Croce, Basilica, Soul Reborn. The Anima Renata Soul Reborn collection wasn't just a fashion show, it was a goddamn resurrection. Staged beneath the soaring frescoed vaults of Santa Croce, where Michelangelo and Galileo lay buried, it was Marco's defiant roar back to life. The gowns, crafted from Sister Claire's impossible recycled silk, floated down the makeshift runway. Each one was a masterpiece of resilience, and each bore a mark of its past trauma, a deliberate tear, a flaw, meticulously repaired with threads of pure Japanese kintsugi gold. The message was clear: beauty not in spite of brokenness, but because of it. The finale, though, belonged to Sofia. She emerged not as a model, but as the embodiment of the collection's spirit. She wore a gown of ethereal white, constructed from Marco's recycled silk, but intricately embroidered with 2,000 tiny shards of reclaimed, shattered mirror. Each fragment caught the light, scattering it, reflecting the faces of the stunned audience, making them part of the art. She looked like a fallen angel, pieced back together with light. She didn't walk like a model. She strode, a warrior queen. Reaching the end of the runway, she didn't pose. She spoke. Her voice, amplified by a discreet microphone, was no longer gravelly, but clear, resonant, filled with a strength that humbled the cavernous space. "We are all broken," she declared, her gaze sweeping the captivated crowd, which included a humbled, visibly aged Antonio De Luca in the back row, awaiting trial but granted permission to attend. His empire was in ruins, his reputation shredded, his assets frozen. His daughter, he now knew, was the architect of his downfall and, strangely, his only remaining link to a past he tried to incinerate. We are all fragments. Shards of conch, Bengali for glass, a nod to the forgotten artisans often exploited by fast fashion. But look around you. Together, shattered as we are, we create the light. We are not defined by our scars, but by how we choose to mend them. This is Bella Rinascita. This is Soul Reborn. The applause wasn't just applause, it was a tidal wave. The new Atelier, spring 2023, weaving lives. The new Bella Rinascita workshop wasn't sterile or grand. It was filled with light, laughter, and the cheerful hum of state-of-the-art machines alongside lovingly restored vintage ones. Sunlight streamed through large open windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sprites. The walls were adorned not with fashion plates, but with photographs of the artisans, men and women from diverse backgrounds, many of them refugees or individuals rebuilding their lives, all trained in the new techniques of sustainable couture. Pride of place, on a central wall, was a massive, stunning portrait of Signora Lucia, who had passed away peacefully a year after De Luca's downfall. It was a mosaic, painstakingly assembled by the artisans from thousands of tiny discarded fabric scraps, a testament to her secret love for Marco's crazy experiments. Marco led Sofia to a quiet corner. There, cleaned and polished, sat Signora Lucia's ancient, battered singer, the one she'd always used, the one Marco remembered from his early days. "I wanted you to have this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He gently ran his hand over the cool metal. She would have liked you. Your fight." Sofia's eyes, usually so guarded, softened. She reached out, her fingers tracing the worn floral decals on the machine's body. She tentatively opened the small, integrated drawer at its base. Inside, nestled amongst old bobbins and needles, was the tin box Marco remembered. She lifted the lid. On top lay a familiar, scorched drawing, one of Marco's early, radical designs he'd crumpled up in frustration and thrown towards the workshop's old stove, intending for it to be kindling. Signora Lucia must have rescued it. On the corner of the singed paper, in her spidery, old-fashioned script, was a note. "Lascia che brucino fino a diventare cenere, poi da quelle ceneri pianta fiori." Let them burn to ashes. Then from those ashes plant flowers. A single tear traced a path down Sofia's cheek. She looked at Marco, a fragile, grateful smile dawning on her face. She knew, didn't she? Cimitero di San Miniato al Monte, whispers on the wind. The Florentine hills blazed with the colors of late autumn. Marco stood before Signora Lucia's simple grave, a bouquet of fiery red carnations, her favorite, in his hand. The wind, smelling of cypress and distant wood smoke, whispered through the ancient trees. From the city below, faint and beautiful, drifted the strains of a violin. Julia, his childhood friend, now a renowned musician, often played here, her music a balm to the city's grieving souls. Today, it sounded like Boccherini, poignant and hopeful. He took out the battered tin box, now his, from his jacket. Inside, along with Lucia's note and the scorched drawing, was a small, rough piece of fabric, a swatch of the cheap, shoddy Chinese silk that had almost destroyed him. He held it up, feeling its coarseness between his fingers. "You were right, Nana Lucia," he murmured, his voice catching, addressing the spirit of the woman who'd been more of a grandmother to him than his own. "I didn't become a coward. We planted flowers." Far below, the Arno River snaked through Florence like a silver ribbon, a city that had seen empires rise and fall, artists flourish and fade, but always found a way to be reborn. Bella Rinascita was more than a brand now. It was a legend, not for the price tags, but for the story woven into its seams. A story of resilience, of redemption, of the stubborn, defiant beauty that can bloom from the deepest wounds. Back in their sunlit workshop, above the main design table, a new plaque had been installed. It was simple, understated, in elegant Italian calligraphy. "Non tessiamo con la seta, ma con frammenti di vite." We weave not with silk, but with fragments of lives. Marco Rossi finally understood. When the world tried to smooth you into a flawless, soulless commodity, the bravest, most beautiful thing you could be was that single, imperfect thread, maybe a little rough around the edges, maybe even scorched, but the one that held everything and everyone together, the one that dared to mend the broken, and in doing so, became whole.